President Lee Jae-myung is heading home from Canada, having concluded his first diplomatic agenda on the international stage with members and partners of the Group of Seven. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Wednesday, June 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Now, this year's three-day Group of Seven summit came to a close in Canada on Tuesday local time, and President Jae-myung is on his way home, having taken part in the extended summit and in a series of sideline summits. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, as always, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, it's great to have you here.
Good afternoon.
Thomas, let's begin with details about President Lee Jae-myung's bilateral engagements over in Canada.
Right, so, well, his most anticipated meeting didn't happen as U.S. President Trump left early, but the second most anticipated did take place, which was his bilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and they met on Tuesday for around 30 minutes, and, according to the readouts of the conversation, it sounded like it was cordial, warm, and I think, it was important in the sense of this is setting the tone at the start of Lee's presidency, particularly in what is the relationship with the Seoul-Tokyo relationship going to be like going forward. I mean, obviously, it improved a lot or grew closer a lot under, Lee's predecessor, President Yoon, and, at times he has been more outspoken and critical of Japan. I mean, he even called some of Yoon's, concessions or maybe negotiations to improve relations with Japan humiliating, and he's warned against Japanese remilitarization. So he's had kind of a colder stance, but this time around, he's taken a more pragmatic approach, it looks like, in terms of diplomacy, at least at this point. So when they talked, both sides talked about closer ties economically among this kind of international trade environment, continuing the shuttle diplomacy, strengthening this trilateral cooperation with the U.S., to sort of face North Korean nuclear threats. And, Lee called the relationship inseparable, said they were like neighbors sharing the same front yard. So, it's, this is the first signal of how he may be approaching this relationship and his diplomatic stance in general. I mean, he also met with several other leaders, a British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, talked about some free trade stuff with the UK, defense cooperation with Canada, met a bunch of other leaders, Australia, India, Brazil, Mexico. And I think just in a general sense, this was the big moment, a return for Korea to the diplomatic stage after 6 months of this turmoil and a leadership vacuum. And that was kind of the point that his office stressed, on the return, that, this was Korea stepping back out into the global stage, and also promoting the resilience of Korea's democracy to get back to this point. So, it was meaningful in that regard for I think, Lee's first international trip.
Right. And the South Korean president, Stephen, also took part in the extended G7 session on energy security, among a host of other global concerns. What more can you tell us about the extended session?
Well, Lee has talked a lot about clean energy and artificial intelligence, like from starting back even when he was campaigning for president before he won the election. He seems to have flagged these as things that are quite essential for South Korea's future from a practical standpoint and also from an economic standpoint. South Korean presidents customarily have this quite active role in guiding the country's industry and channeling state support to what they identify as key industries that can drive future growth. And in the past, that's been, depending how far you go back, it's been shipbuilding, it's been steel, it's been more recently semiconductors, and it seems as though Lee's administration has identified the energy sector and artificial intelligence as things that warrant that kind of state support going ahead. So he's flagged a number of things related to that domestically as targets of support. So he's outlined what I think is 100 trillion won worth of AI investments at home, and and that's in the form of new data centers and GPUs and training domestic talents to be able to fill these jobs. And one thing that I think is interesting that his administration has flagged is like the importance of a domestically created AI that is kind of in tune with Korean language and Korean culture and Korean concepts. So these LLMs and these AI platforms can provide like accurate and helpful answers and solutions to the things that are coming up here. And this intersects kind of interestingly with the question of energy, just because as I think the world is kind of reckoning with now, this expanding this AI infrastructure creates huge energy demand. And you know, at a time when we're trying to like wean ourselves off of old and carbon emitting forms of electricity generation, there's this rising demand. There was some interesting reporting in the Financial Times just recently about just how this is making it harder and harder to get off of coal-fired power plants in a few parts of the world. Korea still has, I think it's something like 30% of Korea's, I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but just as best as I can recall, it's something like that. Electricity generation here comes from coal. We recently saw a tragic case of a worker death at a coal-fired power plant here. So Lee really has some interesting decisions to make as he tries to kind of pursue these dual and sometimes complicated goals of a clean energy pipeline while also supporting the technology that's going to fuel South Korea's next wave of economic growth.
Right, indeed. Thomas, as you mentioned, a summit between the presidents of South Korea and the U.S. did not take place because Mr. Trump had to mark an early departure from his diplomatic engagements in Canada, owing to the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. What's the latest on that front?
Right. So Trump left, Monday night, basically citing this growing conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. And since then it's been, back and forth attacks from Israel and Iran. I mean, there's been kind of mixed messages, I think, coming out from Trump and from the White House. And he basically left, and it's just been signaling via social media. Sort of, it seems like there may be deeper U.S. involvement. I mean, before this, he had been talking about wanting to strike a deal with Iran and seemed confident that that would be the case. But now, there's some sense in some reporting that he's moving maybe more towards getting the U.S. involved in the Israeli, offensive against Iran. I mean, he sent messages early on, basically warning first, everyone in Tehran should evacuate. He called for total surrender. He said that the U.S. knew the location of Iran's, supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, but they weren't going to go after him yet. At the same time, there has been some signaling that he may still be open to some form of negotiation, sending perhaps Vice President J.D. Vance and the envoy over there. And in the meantime, Israel has killed numerous top military leaders, has taken out several nuclear scientists, and has hit a number of nuclear facilities, in Iran. But they're still sort of very dispersed around. And one of the big questions is whether the U.S. will join in and provide these bunker buster missile or bombs that can reach deep into. There's one in particular, this Fordo, nuclear facility that's deep in a mountain. So, will the U.S. join in and use this weapon? It may be the only way to reach that Iranian nuclear facility. But U.S. has already sent some aircraft, some refueling aircraft to Europe, maybe some fighter jets. At the same time, Khamenei is responding. He said on social media that there'd be no mercy and the battle's beginning. People are fleeing Tehran. So, it's all very, very active, and it's a question. I don't think anyone knows what Trump is going to do. He held an NSC meeting, as I think you reported in the last segment on Tuesday, but there's not really a sense of where that's going. It's also started debate within the U.S. about America's involvement. I mean, some of Trump's own MAGA base are very against getting involved in a war or a conflict in the Middle East, and that was something that Trump really ran on doing, no more wars. So he's got pushback from like Tucker Carlson, the former Fox host, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, a very, very strong MAGA supporter. And, as well, some people are questioning this another presidential authority overreach. Is he able to just sort of unilaterally declare these military occupations? So those are, the main sort of moving pieces now, but obviously it left a huge shadow over the G7 summit. I mean, I think there was some sense that Trump didn't really want to be there that much anyway. There was some reporting that he's kind of wasn't keen on it, and in general, he's not keen on these group settings with other kind of allied leaders. So that's a little bit of it too. But so that's basically where things stand at the moment.
Right. And speaking about Mr. Trump not being too keen on group settings, even while in Canada, there were also reports about Mr. Trump being or appearing rather reluctant to sign joint statements, or whether they were on de-escalating tensions between Iran and Israel, or whether with regard to Ukraine and Russia. What are your thoughts regarding that hesitation?
Well, as Thomas laid out, these big multilateral settings are just kind of not his thing. I mean, like you get together with a bunch of leaders of other countries and you say like, we have these things in common, we believe in these values in common, and we pledge to work together to solve these problems in a way that's like works in all of our interests. That's just not really the way that Trump operates, and that's not the way, I mean, specifically 2.0, this second time around, he's really kind of doubled down on wanting to approach things on a case-by-case basis, of kind of starting with like when it comes to tariffs, like laying out these quite broad, almost blanket sorts of measures, and then like encouraging each country to come to negotiate on their own, like make their own offer. Solidarity and collective action is just not really his style. When it comes to Israel and Iran, I mean, I can only really speculate, but I have to assume that he has something like that in mind. Like he probably did not want to sign something at the G7 because that would be kind of tipping his hand early. It would be, showing which way he's leaning, or perhaps he would be under pressure to sign something that he didn't really believe in, full stop. There's been reporting in the U.S. media that like what he has been encouraging his Middle East envoy and some other senior administration officials to do everything they can to initiate direct meetings with Iran. It seems to me, like knowing what we know about Trump, that he probably wants to position himself as the kind of deal maker here. He wants to step in between the U.S. ally Israel and this old adversary Iran, and come to some kind of agreement where the U.S. gets some big concession, whatever that might be, and perhaps they agree to ease economic sanctions on Tehran. I mean, Trump, I remember even before Trump was president the first time, he's like, Iran has been a topic that's really kind of ruffled his feathers, because it's a dictator that is, kind of thumbing its nose at the U.S.-led world order, and it's, kind of going its own way and pursuing nuclear weapons in a way that like defies what the U.S. has customarily, the direction that they've kind of tried to steer it. And so this conflict, I mean, as we know, let's not forget like just the, when we talk about these kind of wars, I think it's important to realize that like while we are comfortable talking about it in kind of abstract terms, like this is a real urgent situation on the ground here. Anytime Trump or someone else, or Tucker Carlson for that matter, like says something about, whether or not this country can have a nuclear bomb, or whatever the, issuing evacuation advisories, that there's a real frantic situation there. So I just hope that things don't get too far out of hand, and I hope that whatever Trump is thinking, he proceeds in a calm manner as he interacts with Tehran, because the stakes are very high.
Right, for sure. Thomas, while in Canada, Mr. Trump, he also condemned, if you will, the G7 with regard to its ouster of Russia back in 2014. Could you remind us about the reason behind Russia's expulsion from the then group of 8 back in 2014? And what has been the response to Mr. Trump's latest remarks?
Right, so this, was Trump brought this up right at the start of his, appearance at G7, completely unprompted, and just had basically blamed Russia's ouster from the G8 at that point in 2014, blamed it on former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Obama, even though it was actually Stephen Harper who was the prime minister at that time. And Russia was expelled because they had just done this annexation of Crimea. And actually the G8 summit that year was going to be held in Sochi, Russia as well. So, and there was wide support for kicking Russia out. I mean, even among the conservative side of things, certainly in that and back in those days. And Trump, while riffing on this basically at G7, he called the ouster a big mistake, said it would be better if Putin were here at the table. He said there would have been no war if Putin had been, still in the G8, which, the reason he was expelled in the first place was because he invaded and annexed Ukraine. So, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense. But he also, he frequently touts his personal relationship with Putin. He said Putin was insulted. He only talks to me. And Trump has a history of kind of framing arguments, taking Russia's sort of framing of situations into account. Last week, I think he had also mentioned something in passing about having spoken to Putin and saying, why does everyone hate Russia? Russia was on our side in World War II. Everybody likes Japan and Germany now, but they were our enemy and everyone hates Russia. Why is that? That's so strange. And he just has this historical propensity for seeing things from Russia's point of view in a way that, there's been a million questions as to why that is and what is his affinity for Putin about. At the same time, this is all in the context of Zelensky, Ukrainian President Zelensky did come to G7, and there was a lot of expectation that he would meet with Trump, and he, I think, had high hopes of, securing just more general support for Ukraine and even making a weapons purchase from the U.S. And so, this comment was made in the context of Zelensky kind of on his way there, and that meeting obviously didn't happen. Response is just basically Kremlin agreed. They said, yes, we agree, but I think it was the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, called G7 useless. But otherwise, there's been some pushback. I mean, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said it was the right thing to do. There was no room in the G8 or G7 for war criminals, and no place at the table for Putin. So, that's been the general response to it. But it's another one of these kind of puzzling, just outreach to Russia that Trump has a long history of doing.
Right. And moving beyond Mr. Trump then, Stephen, speaking as a Canadian journalist based here in South Korea, watching the events taking place at home from here, what would you credit the host, Prime Minister Mark Carney, with? That is, with regard to the G7 that just came to an end, and what perhaps could have been done to perhaps enhance this particular gathering this year?
Well, I'm not sure being Canadian gives me any special insight, but I will say that the footage that I saw of the world leaders gathering in this very idyllic mountain setting did make me kind of homesick. But I would just say that the reality is that the real kind of headline stakes of this gathering were not so much directly related to Canada, even though Canada was the host. I mean, the thing is, I think this is the first gathering of this nature that has taken place since the imposition of U.S. tariffs. So I think South Korea's leader included, a lot of leaders were there trying to get face time with the U.S. leadership and try to maybe, not carry out full-blown trade negotiations, but kind of plant the seed. I talked to an expert before Lee's trip who said that he would probably on his task would be to establish a kind of personal rapport, get to know each other a little bit, maybe plant some kind of anecdotes, that's something that might stick in Trump's mind that they could later build on. Nobody got to do that, but just for when you asked specifically about Carney and how he carried forth, I think there are two things that kind of stuck out to me. One of which is that Canada announced a $2 billion deal to provide military assistance to Ukraine. These are $2 billion Canadian dollars, so it's not as much as if it were in Thomas's money or some other currencies. But I mean, I thought that was noteworthy just because the NATO summit is coming up, and there's this, over the past couple of years, we've seen this kind of Western fatigue when it comes to supporting Ukraine. Trump has been quite vocal in advancing that kind of skepticism. The other one is Carney managed to meet with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the two of them agreed that they would reappoint high commissioners in each other's country. They had this quite sprawling diplomatic crisis on the bilateral level in recent years that's related to the slaying of that took place in Canada of a Sikh nationalist and a number of other issues of bilateral concern. I know that there's a very big Indian population in Canada, and the two countries customarily have close ties dating back to the British Commonwealth and cooperation that takes on a range of forms. So I was glad to see them taking a step towards getting back to normal. Maybe it's helpful that Canada has a new leadership in place. So those are two takeaways. But I do think that like the bigger legacy of this gathering will probably be, in a lot of countries, disappointment that they weren't able to engage in direct talks with the U.S. because of Trump's early departure.
Right, which is why quite a number of pundits are saying perhaps next week's annual NATO summit in the Netherlands could provide another opportunity. Right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Stephen, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Thomas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we say goodbye for today. We return same time tomorrow with another edition of Press Perspective.